Hi everyone. The composer that I picked to talk about for week 2 is Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, and his last name is hyphenated, Rimsky-Korsakov, and we use both names when we talk about him, so Rimsky-Korsakov. And he was a romantic composer in Russia and alive around the same time as Tchaikovsky. And as I mentioned in the Tchaikovsky video, at around the time that they were both alive, Russian composers were just starting to write in the classical style, and there were kind of two schools of thought. One was kind of where Tchaikovsky ended, which was that they wanted to try to sound like other European composers, especially German composers. And then the other school of thought was more where Rimsky-Korsakov was, which was that they wanted to try to develop a uniquely Russian style of composition. So that's a difference between Rimsky-Korsakov and Tchaikovsky. The piece that I chose to talk about for Rimsky-Korsakov is probably his most famous one. It's called Scheherazade. And the genre of it, I would say, would be a symphonic suite or an orchestral suite. And so suite is spelled S-U-I-T-E. So it's like a collection of something. In this case, it's a collection of movements. And so when we talk about music, movements are separate sections of a larger piece, and they are generally completely separated in that the orchestra will stop playing for the space in between movements. At the end of one movement, they'll stop playing, maybe put their instruments down to rest for a minute, the conductor will stop conducting for a minute, and then they'll start up again with the next movement. And this is kind of a scary thing for people who are not necessarily used to going to classical music concerts. They tend to be afraid of clapping at the wrong time, because in between movements, you won't typically clap. You'll wait until the end of the last movement of the piece to finally clap. And the reason for that is that the movements, even though they're separate, are all part of a larger piece. So in this case, there are 4 movements in this symphonic suite, Scheherazade, and you wouldn't clap until the end of the 4th movement when the whole piece is over. The title of this piece kind of indicates something interesting about it, which is that it's what we'd call program music. So program music is music with a program. So what do we mean by program? A program is something outside of the music, like a meaning outside of the music itself. So it's typically something from literature, like a story or a character or a place or a thing that the music is trying to depict. And so maybe to clarify, the opposite of program music would be what we'd call absolute music. So the idea there is that the music is expressing musical ideas, and it certainly might evoke emotion in you. The composer may have had certain emotions or even things he's thinking of in mind when he wrote the music, but he's not trying to convey a specific story or character sketch in the music. So there was a big debate during the Romantic period about whether music that doesn't have words, so music played only by instruments, should have a program and be program music, or that should not have a program and be absolute music. Music that has words, like an opera or even just a song, is automatically program music because the words are expressing a meaning in addition to the music, the musical ideas. And the way that you know whether a piece of music that's only played by instruments that doesn't have words, well, the only way that you know if it's a programmatic piece of music is by having things like a title to the piece, like Scheherazade, or having titles for the movements. So as an example, the first movement of Scheherazade is called The Sea and Sinbad's Ship. If you didn't have those titles, you wouldn't know that the music had a program. But with those titles, which if you go to a concert, you would see them printed in your program, that's how you know that there's a program. The composer told you by naming the piece, naming the movements, things like that. So in the case of Scheherazade, this is a piece that is meant to evoke for you the stories in the Arabian Nights. If you're familiar with that book, it's a lot of fun to read. It's stories set in the Middle East and India, kind of the Middle Eastern or a Muslim and Hindu world. And these are stories that are told by the storyteller Scheherazade, who was a woman just telling all of these different stories. And so in the piece Scheherazade, you actually get to hear a representation of Scheherazade in the violin solo. So there's this melody that the violin plays that keeps coming back in each of the 4 movements. And that melody is meant to represent Scheherazade. So if you start at the beginning of the piece, within the first few minutes you'll hear it, and it'll just keep coming back throughout the piece. So that is the voice of Scheherazade telling these stories. And so each movement is not necessarily meant to tell a specific, moment by moment story where, this sound represents this certain action. But it's more that they're meant to evoke the general feeling of the story that the movement of the title of the movement. So for instance, the first movement, like I said, is the sea and Sinbad's ship. So it's meant to sound, I think it does have a sound like the sea, this sort of rocking, rolling sort of feeling that a ship on a sea would have. So it's just meant to get your imagination going, thinking about maybe visualizing or thinking about events that might happen on this this ship in the sea with sailors on it. And so similarly, the last movement, I forget what the exact title of it is, but it's something about a market in Baghdad. So it's meant to make you think of this Middle Eastern marketplace and sort of the sights and sounds and smells of a place like that. So something fun to do might be to listen to at least part of this piece and look at the movement title and see if you think it sounds like what it's named. And it is a longer piece. The whole piece is included in the link that I put in the description. So if you don't make it through the whole thing, that's okay. But certainly start at the beginning. That's probably the most famous part of it. And see if you think it sounds like the sea and sailors. See if you hear Scheherazade's music in the violin. And just listen to as much of it as you want and see what it what it evokes in your imagination. So like I said, this is probably Rimsky-Korsakov's most famous piece, Scheherazade, a symphonic suite, an example of program music, and written in the Romantic period. So I hope you like it.